Ba, 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 ba. Ba, da, ba, ba, ba.
Oh, looks like we're broadcasting now.
We are broadcasting
We are.
live
We're doing
from
some
Indiana,
backstage
West
talk.
Virginia, and
No,
Canada. Okay, we are broadcasting live from the world. Thank you to our one listener.
Down.
It's Happy Turkey Day, and we love you. We are with Dale Glover from presenting and
Real
discussing the
Seeker.
argument from Beauty.
Yes, we are. And guess what?
What?
Dale is the man. Dale is the man.
Is the man.
We love
Awesome.
Dale.
Thanks.
Say hi, Dale.
Yeah,
Hi,
hi, Tyler and Fowler, and I love your accent there. You're
Don't
really
say
nice.
my name. Don't say my name.
All right. Well, yeah. Thanks for having me on, guys, to talk about this argument.
So what is this thing that Canadians say a lot? Like, what's one of
Get the
the
bag of
stereotypes? What are some of the stereotypes? What
With
is it?
Canada? Well,
yeah,
obviously A at the end.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm sure Canadians don't say that. Dale,
Yep.
have you ever had a Canadian say, yeah, A?
And this is
don't really
Dale's
say that.
favorite. I think this is
didn't.
this is Dale's
You
favorite.
interrupted our Dale man.
This is Dale's favorite thing
The bag of
to
milk.
drink.
That is, yeah, we drink bags of milk in Canada, so that's the type I get. Got it in my fridge right now, so
Where does it
How-
sit? I mean,
Yeah.
how does it fit?
it's in the bottom shelf, just in case.
How
It's got to
much?
take up the whole shelf, doesn't it?
Listen, Dale, how much milk is in a bag? And don't say a bag, but how many
Well, there's
ounces?
3 bags. I think they're a liter each, so it's like 3
A
liters.
liter. A liter. Sir, we are on the standard system on Faith Unaltered, okay? We don't
Okay.
do this metric liter nonsense. How many feet of milk? That's the CSG.
No idea.
What in the world is going on?
You guys are
In honor of CSG.
The civic
This is a
salaried
tight call, man.
guys. The civic salaried guys. CSG.
Oh, it is.
All right,
We
need
had
to
such a
like-
good conversation, man. I just loved it when you guys were doing CSG too.
We need to get serious. Super serial. Dance pop. Go. Oh. What? What? Feeding the ducks. What's that?
Are you guys doing that intro thing still? Or like-
Definitely, if you guys
We're
wanna
doing it
ask
right
questions.
now. Shut up.
Hey, guys, if you want
Goodbye.
to, Hello, 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 ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of Faith Unaltered. I am your host, David Russell, and I am joined with an all-star cast tonight. In the flickering colored background, we've got Tyler, the man, the myth, the legend, Fowler.
Hi.
And under me, but not below me, is my good friend, Dale Glover. Man, it is such an honor to have just to be in your presences, guys. I mean, it's just it's grace, it's mercy, it's relationship, and I'm just honored to be with you guys, man.
Are you though?
I
You
really am.
really?
I am, sir.
Good.
I am.
It's an honor to be here.
Yes, it's really awesome. Whoa, you are stroking out, bro.
If you have
it's like a rave at Tyler's house.
Epilepsy disorder, I apologize.
With his wood wallpaper there.
That's right. There we wait.
Awesome.
There
well,
we go.
yeah, thanks for bringing me on, David.
Hi.
Hi, Tyler. I know you're in a bit of a mood tonight, so it's gonna be a fun night, I think. But
it's going to be an excellent night. Thank you to our listeners. Thank you, David, for the amazing intro. Thank you, Dale Glover, for joining us. It's time to get serious, though. We've got an awesome episode, guys and gals. We're going to be talking about the argument for beauty tonight. One argument that I've never heard of before, and so I'm excited to have Dale joining us so he can just blow my mind like he did with egalitarianism whenever we had our discussion on Theo Geeks the other day. And so, Dale, thank you for being here, sir.
No problem. Thank you, guys. Yeah.
So, so before you start, Dale, let's just get a backdrop on the argument from beauty, guys. The argument of beauty just hasn't come up that much. It's not a real popular argument. People have kind of ruled this argument out for a long time. It kind of faded away in the 1930s, right? And especially in the 40s when you get this notion that beauty is in the eye of the beholder, right? So once we subjectivized beauty in the 40s, you started noticing in the 50s advertisements where we get to where we're at today in this culture.
But
you
what
get these
about
advertisements. No, it wasn't gone in the 20s yet, but in the 40s and 50s we start seeing like advertisements on what people should look like, how they should dress, what's cool. You had the cigarette commercials, you had all these different commercials, and society set a trend of what they think beauty should look like. And today we're suffering the effects, because once beauty goes, then they start trying to chip away at morality, which we find ourselves still in this position today where they're trying to erode objective morality and more realism. So with the argument from beauty being gone, it kind of opened up Pandora's box, and it causes a lot of people even today to say, okay, I have to look a certain way, I have to be a certain way to be beautiful. And we didn't have these issues too much in our society, and everything gets fixed with duct tape, but that's okay. The whole thing is, once the argument from beauty was gone, it opened up Pandora's box to where we have the situation we're in today, where people have low self-esteem, and we have celebrities trying to tell us what beauty is, and how we get into these trends. So I am really excited.
Is that where all that nonsense came from?
It did. It came from the 50s and manifested. It came from the 50s. It manifested in the 60s, and it's continued on from there. So I'm really excited to see what Dale presents here. I want to hear a great argument for beauty. I know Jonathan Pritchett, one of my professors over in Trinity, he makes a great argument too. So I'm wondering how it compares. And you know what? I'm hoping that this show and Dale Glover put the argument from beauty back on the table as an objective reality. Dale, it's all yours, brother.
Awesome. Yeah. So, like I said, thank you guys so much for letting me come on and give kind of a presentation about my argument for God from beauty in the world and some of the aesthetic features that we see. Obviously, as Bible believing Christians, look, there are Bible verses that says, for God has made everything beautiful in its time. That's in Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 11. Even in the book of Genesis, when after God creates the entire universe and everything in it, he looks at it and he says it's very good. In the Hebrew, this is tov, which carries with it not just more. He's not just saying it's morally good, but it's aesthetically good. It's beautiful as well. So there's this kind of connotation in the Bible and that sort of thing. So yeah, I do think it's a bit of a shame that this has been kind of an often neglected argument. Most Christian apologists like to focus on the moral argument that has a bit more meat and controversy to it and that sort of thing. But I think that it's been kind of gaining ground in recent years and that sort of thing. So yeah, one thing I just want to do. So let me just share my screen. First, I'll just do a quick little video primer before I get into my argument. So this will be by fellow Christian apologist Sean McDowell and his take on that. So let me share the screen. Okay, is that popping up?
It has not popped.
No. Oh, okay.
Negative.
Now?
There we go.
All right, perfect. And I shall turn up the volume. All right, so let's listen to Sean.
Beauty.
Think of the most beautiful thing you can imagine. Is it a rose, a snow-capped mountain, a rhythmic dance, or a distant galaxy? For me, I think of Glacier Bay in Alaska. It's magnificent, and it's truly beautiful. I also think of the aqua-colored water and the coral in the Caribbean. Regardless of what came to your mind, I doubt any of you, when I asked the question, thought, beauty, I don't believe there's real beautiful things in the world. The reality is, we all actually believe in objective beauty. And yet, interestingly, when asked, most people would say they agree with the statement that beauty is in the eye of the beholder. So which is it? Is beauty a real part of the world in which we live? Or is it entirely a matter of personal preference, like choosing an ice cream flavor? If you find yourself agreeing with the statement that beauty is in the eye of the beholder, then you need to at least realize that you are in the minority in terms of history. That's right. Most thinkers from a variety of traditions have believed that there are three transcendentals that stand outside of human opinion: goodness, truth, and beauty. And if beauty really exists, then there's good reason to believe there's a God or some kind of divine artist responsible for making the world beautiful. The Christian worldview takes beauty seriously, since God himself is beautiful and he has crafted the world with purpose and order. We should expect to find beauty in creation, and that is exactly what we find. The splendor of a waterfall, the magnificence of a diamond, or the grandeur of a sequoia tree. The world is filled with beauty. Just take a look at the world around you, or even take out your smartphone and look at the photos. Our hearts resonate when we experience beauty. The existence of real beauty in the world may not prove that God exists, but it is one powerful pointer that the world has been fashioned with purpose, order, and beauty by a divine artist.
All right, awesome. So that's it.
Jamming.
Yeah, it was a great video. So
I loved it.
all right. So I want to bring up my PowerPoint slides now. So hopefully am I still sharing my screen? Can you guys see the slides?
Yep. Can you full screen it?
Yep.
Nice.
Awesome. So yeah, so in recent years, as I said, some Christian apologists have come up with their own versions, trying to argue, namely for objective beauty, as a property in the real world, and from that to God. So I've kind of come up with my own argument, and you can see it's a simple modus ponens argument, right? So premise one is what I call the relevant aesthetic features exist in the world. Premise two, if the relevant aesthetic features exist, then what I call theistic dispositional realism hypothesis is the best explanation for those features. Obviously, from that, it follows, well, theistic dispositional realism is the best explanation. So as I said, this is a valid deductive argument. So basically it comes down to, well, are the two premises justified, or are we warranted in believing that these premises are true? So let me get into the first premise. What are these aesthetic features that I'm talking about? So in the first place, we have what are called aesthetic correctness conditions, right? Our aesthetic values can be correct or incorrect, and our judgments about something, the Picasso is a beautiful painting. We're asserting that as something that is true or false. Our assertions are meant to be true or false. And I think the way we would establish this, one way to do this is to think of a serial killer who chops off all of his victims' heads, and he puts them on pikes and puts it into the backyard, and he says, that's so beautiful. Every normal human being in the world is screaming, no, that's incorrect. That is disgusting. The correct judgment is to say that is ugly, that is hideous, that's grotesque. So this kind of establishes that there are these aesthetic correctness conditions. When we assert that something's beautiful, we're intending to say that that's true or false, kind of type deal. The second aspect of the aesthetic world is that there are aesthetic value disagreements. So, I mean, this shouldn't be controversial. There are disagreements in art and about beauty all the time in the world. But the thing to mention here is that we're not just talking about factual disputes. We're not just saying, I think the Mona Lisa's nose is 5 centimeters versus no, it's 5.5 centimeters, you idiot, or something like that. No, we're talking about valuational, very sophisticated disputes about, I think the Mona Lisa is aesthetically good versus bad. So that's what we're talking about there. We also have this feature of aesthetic refinement, right? As we grow up, we mature, and our aesthetic appreciations grow up along with that in a lot of cases. And we begin listening to music and appreciating that and stuff like that. So there is development and growth, and even education in terms of aesthetics. The fourth one is what I call aesthetic object relevance. So this is kind of what Sean McDowell was saying in that little video there, right? So it's saying, look, the aesthetic objects, the painting itself, the sunset on a landscape or something like that, these objects themselves are necessary to ground aesthetic values and judgments. You need to have the object play some kind of role, at least a partial role. I think a way to establish that is Philip Talon's destruction argument, right? So if you picture a beautiful historical temple and ISIS comes in and destroys it and wipes it out, well, we've clearly lost something of aesthetic beauty there, and that's valuable. And even if a bunch of scientists say, oh, don't worry, look, we can plug you into the matrix and we have all the properties, all the measurements, everything, we can recreate a hologram of it. Most people still see there's still something missing, right? That's not good enough. We want the real thing. So I think that destruction argument is a good way to establish that the objects are indeed relevant. Number 5 is that, but by the same token, aesthetic subjects are also needed, right? I mean, think about it. Values, what are those? Those are the qualia, or the experience of the aesthetic things. Well, you need an experiencer, right? A person who has that aesthetic experience. Judgments, well, these are propositions, right? Propositional evaluations. And evaluations require an evaluator. So you need this subject as well. The 6th one is very interesting. So a lot of philosophers have kind of noted throughout history, going back to the ancient Greeks, that moral values and aesthetic values are interconnected, and there are these correlations and stuff like that. Human beings have this tendency to associate moral value, what's morally good is also aesthetically good, is also beautiful, and what's morally bad is also ugly or reprehensible or something like that. And what's interesting here, I'll just again be quick, because originally I had a time limit of 20 to 25 minutes, but kind of taking my time a little bit more with this. But there have been studies, dozens and dozens of studies in cognitive psychology. So we have scientific proof of this, that human beings do correlate these things, right? So just a couple of examples. Hang on, I'll just bring that up. So here's a couple of examples here, right? So moral beauty is perceived as more beautiful. So there have been studies where people find a certain individual physically ugly or not attractive, but then they later find out that they're morally good. They have a good character. And that actually influences our perception of their physical attractiveness, of their beauty as well. And that's, like I said, been established in various studies. Likewise, beauty actually encourages us to behave morally. So there have been studies where, if you feel you're around beautiful people, you tend to act in a morally good way, more so than when you're around people you perceive as ugly. You kind of, well, I can drop the ball, what the heck. So those are just a couple of the interesting studies there. And then the final feature is this interesting tendency of human beings to not defer to any other human beings in terms of aesthetic values and judgments. It doesn't even matter if they're artists. We have this, or experts, right? We have this tendency to go, no, I don't care. Picasso is crap. I don't care if all the artsy fartsy people think it's so great. No, that's garbage. I'm not going to defer to you, type thing. So these are kind of the 7 aesthetic features that come up in the literature and that I think need to be explained by any given hypothesis. So yeah, let's turn to that then. What are some of the aesthetic hypotheses that have come up? And you can see I've listed 7 here. Again, originally, when David Russell invited me on the show, he pitched me at 20 to 25 minutes. But now he's saying I can go a bit longer and take my time. So I'm just going to cover the 5 in the presentation, and maybe the 2 that I'm leaving out we can go over afterwards. But just briefly, aesthetic emotivism is basically the thesis that aesthetic values reduce down to our emotions, and aesthetic judgments, what they are expressions of our emotions. So when you say, Picasso is beautiful, you're really saying like, oh, Picasso makes me happy, or something like that. And then there's aesthetic Platonism, which is kind of basically saying that there's this Platonic heavenly realm and aesthetic values. Things are beautiful insofar as they share or participate in the beautiful form up in this Platonic heaven or something like that. But again, we'll get into more details on that in the Q&A if the hosts want. So of the ones we're covering, we have aesthetic subjectivism. So this is really popular, right? Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And a more appropriate way to say it is beauty is solely in the eye of the beholder, right? So it's basically saying, as an anti-realist position, look, the objects themselves and their properties are totally irrelevant. You don't need them to ground aesthetic values and judgments at all. If I could give you a drug and you felt that induced the same aesthetic experience within you and stuff like that, and you hallucinated something, that alone is sufficient to ground these aesthetic values in our judgments. And the other thing that's important here is that it does have truth conditions, but they're relative, right? So it's true for me that Picasso is beautiful, and it's true for Jim Bob Jones down the street that Picasso is ugly. Truths are relative to individual subjects. So in a nutshell, that's sort of the position there. Now, what would I say by way of assessment? So obviously, in terms of aesthetic correctness conditions, I think it fails to account for this. Because, okay, so I've lost my notes here. I can't see it, but I don't think it's able to account for aesthetic correctness conditions, right? Because remember that serial killer example that I gave before? No, that serial killer is incorrect in valuing decapitated heads floating around on sticks on his backyard. That's wrong. That's an erroneous evaluation of that, right? And I think that most of us would confirm that, yeah, that's what we're saying. That's not valuable, aesthetically speaking. Likewise, it flat out denies aesthetic object relevance. And like I said, through that destruction argument of Philip Talon, and he's done a lot of work kind of establishing this aspect for the objectivity of aesthetic values, I think that, yeah, this shows that subjectivism is a failure. we also have the fact that, well, why is there the correlations between aesthetic values and moral values, right? If aesthetic truths are all relative to various subjects, well, so, not everyone who, why would there be this correlation? It doesn't make sense, really. And then finally, it's questionable. Why would there be value disagreements at all? If truth is relative to individuals, why wouldn't we just say, yeah, well, that's true for you. The heck with that, serial killer. You think those heads are beautiful? Great, true for you, not true for me, and then leave it at that. But instead, no, we engage in these bitter disagreements, and we're offended when people have different aesthetic evaluations than ourselves. What do you mean you like that piece of music? That heavy metal sucks. What's wrong with you? So yeah, I think it struggles on this front. Okay, so let's go on the other end then. So now we have aesthetic objectivism, and this basically kind of says, well, look, aesthetic values and judgments, they're totally grounded in objects themselves, the properties that these objects have. And there's two major categories. So there's the reductionist version. So this goes back to the ancient Greeks, and they'll say, the aesthetic property of being beautiful, that actually reduces down to something like symmetry or proportionality, right? The golden mean ratio or something like that. And you have the Parthenon here, and it's so symmetrical. That's why it's beautiful. That's what we mean by beautiful. We mean it's proportional, or we mean it's symmetrical. But then more recently, I would say, coming about with in the philosophy of mind, there's been a lot of debates about emergentism and emergent properties, or properties that supervene on the lower properties. And I think the reductionist versions are what Sean McDowell would go for, right? He mentioned his wife. I'm not sure if he mentioned in that clip that I played, but in the fuller video that I took it from, he mentioned his wife had the property of being beautiful. So this is an irreducible property. It's a fundamental property, and it doesn't reduce down to other properties. And it's kind of like water. If you picture water, well, what is it? It's H2O, with the molecules arranged in a certain order or something like that. But is water really have the property of wetness in itself? Well, not scientifically speaking. So what these non-reductionists would say is they would say wetness is a property of the water that supervenes on the property of the molecules. Okay, so yeah, how does objectivism do? Again, I think it really struggles with value disagreements. There are some explanations, but it's kind of vague. How would it be able? Why would there be disagreements if the beauty is ultimately in these objects and their properties? We should just be able to see it, and everyone should agree. Yeah, this thing has that property. There aren't really a lot of disagreements about other properties of physical things, about, yeah, it's this length and stuff like that. We can all agree. You measure it and we all agree, right? But the main problem with this is that it denies the use of the necessity of the aesthetic subject. Again, evaluations require an evaluator. You need a mind to make that judgment and to make that proposition. This thing is beautiful, this thing is ugly. And then obviously under objectivism, again, you can ask, why is there this correlation between aesthetic and moral values? A lot of them fail on this front. Okay, next up are evolutionary explanations, and there are various theories. I've listed 6 here. There are even more than that. So, for example, one that's really famous is the biophilia hypothesis. And this kind of says, well, aesthetic values, they're grounded in beautiful habitat selection. There are certain, I think there's about 7 or 8 types of habitats that universally across the human race we find beautiful, type deal. And they say, well, this goes back to in a certain time in our evolutionary past where we selected these habitats because they were fit for our survival, and that became associated with this aesthetic value of being beautiful and stuff like that. But yeah, again, I didn't know how much time I would have. I thought I was going to be limited to 20 minutes originally. So I just wanted to focus on the first one here, this natural selection, right? So it just says, look, aesthetic features are conducive to fitness, or they're indicative of health, fitness, your ability to reproduce and pass your genes on to the next generation. So how does that theory, evolutionary theory, do? Well, once again, it doesn't do too well in terms of the aesthetic correctness conditions. And hold on. Oh, okay. So, and if you think about it, the reason, one reason why is because think about it, we find things that are not conducive to our survivability or to reproducing to be beautiful, to be aesthetically good. So think of a tiger, for example. Why on earth would we ever evolve to think that a tiger is beautiful? It's a very dangerous thing. It should be the most ugly thing imaginable. Or think of landscapes that are not hospitable for human beings, like a snow-capped mountain. Why on God's green earth do we find that to be beautiful? You can't survive up there. We should find it ugly and hideous. So this is kind of a contradiction. And even Charles Darwin himself noticed this about natural selection. And he said, yeah, natural selection, it just fails because you have these features of animals taking on these features or judgments about the world and their cells. Like think of a peacock with its feathers. This is, from an evolutionary standpoint, costly. It harms their ability to survive and pass on their genes and that sort of thing. So it's insufficient. And one thing I'll say about this is I like the work of an ornithologist. So he studies birds, and he's kind of a world's expert, Richard Prum. And he's actually kind of proven, and it's becoming more widespread in the scientific community, that the property being beautiful is fundamental in biology, in the world of animals and stuff like that. Beauty is this fundamental entity or unit. Animals are not, or at least within the bird kingdom, they're not selecting their mates going, oh, well, you're beautiful, therefore you must be healthy and fit, and therefore I'm going to select you as a mate or something like that, right? It's the same with human beings. No, the physical attractiveness or the beauty is a fundamental feature in and of itself. So this has been proven in the animal kingdom. Also, why would we evolve, again, to have aesthetic and moral value correlations? I'm not sure that makes sense. They wouldn't really be linked under an evolutionary explanation, I think. What's the survivability of moral values and stuff like that? Typically, evolutionists go for more of a social cohesion type explanation to explain moral values, right? But under the theory, the natural selection version, you can't appeal to that type thing, right? And then finally, aesthetic non-deference, that it doesn't make sense. Why would we, if it's all related to survivability, we would have evolved to want to defer to the experts. You're going to help me to survive, so I'm going to value what you value type thing. You know more than me, you know better. Okay, finally, next we come to the dispositional realism hypothesis. So now we're getting closer to the truth. And basically, this is a position that says, look, the aesthetic objects are necessary to ground aesthetic values, right? The properties of the objects themselves are necessary, but what those properties are, they're dispositional properties. They're properties that dispose a given aesthetic subject to respond in a certain way, namely to have the proper aesthetic experience and value, and then to make that subsequent aesthetic judgment that corresponds to those properties. So it's under this notion, it's kind of a causal conception of aesthetic values, right? So the object's properties are necessary and they cause the proper aesthetic subject to have the proper response in reaction to it. And on this thing, you can ask, well, what or who is the proper aesthetic subject? And here's where it's kind of qualified. So this started with David Hume, the atheist philosopher from the 18th century. And basically says, look, the aesthetic values and judgments of the lower plebs, of Dale or Jim Bob Jones or something like that, who gives a fig? They're irrelevant. We don't care about them. It's only the proper qualified aesthetic experts. It's their values and it's their judgments. That's what grounds these values. That's what counts. So insofar you're correct or incorrect, insofar as you agree with the aesthetic experts. If you disagree with them, you're incorrect. If you agree, you're correct. So that's how this theory goes. And you can see there are three main problems with this, right? So the first thing, again, why would there be aesthetic and moral value correlations? Art experts don't tend to be especially ethical or moral in nature. They're not also moral experts. So why is there this correlation, and what does that mean? Secondly, we have this feature, aesthetic non-deference. Again, I told you, most people have this tendency to not want to defer to the art experts. That doesn't make sense if dispositional realism is true. And then finally, aesthetic value disagreements. There's been a ton of literature on this. I mean, think about it. Sure, dispositional realism can explain why there are disagreements in terms of layman Dale Glover and Jim Bob or Tyler or something like that. But there are also these very entrenched value disagreements at the level of the experts themselves. The experts themselves disagree with each other, sometimes very passionately. So again, this is a real Achilles heel for dispositional realism here. Okay, so let's come to my suggestion then, that I think is the best explanation, and it's theistic dispositional realism. So what is this theory? How does it work? Well, it's the exact same as natural dispositional realism, right? It has the relevance of the object. The objects have certain dispositional properties that cause the proper aesthetic subject to respond in the proper way. But when we come to the question, well, who is this proper aesthetic subject? It's not a human being. It's not some art expert. It's God. God is the ultimate judge. What God values in terms of aesthetically, that's what we should value aesthetically. What God judges to be beautiful or ugly, we should also judge to be ugly. That is what is his judgments provide the ultimate truth conditions for these aesthetic judgments. So how does this one do? So as you can see, it explains everything perfectly, except for number two. We still have this problem of aesthetic value judgments, and it's a little bit questionable. I would say that, if God is the grounding for all aesthetic values and judgments, and he made man to reflect his aesthetic values and judgments, well, why do we still disagree? That shouldn't be happening. Is God an incompetent designer? What's going on? So there are various answers in the literature to this issue. So the first response is just to kind of say, look, what's happening here is human beings, we don't actually disagree about what's aesthetically good versus aesthetically bad overall. We just have disagreements in the degree. I think The Count of Monte Cristo is the best movie. Someone might disagree. They'll still say, yeah, The Count of Monte Cristo, it's a good movie, but it's not the best. So it's just a difference in degree. That's one response people can give. I don't think that fully solves the problem, to be honest, in my view. Another answer is, well, look, we're just differing in the aesthetic hierarchy, right? So similar in moral debates, right? If you picture the abortion debate in terms of moral values, there's a principle of life, preservation, and there's also a principle of autonomy, the woman's autonomy. These two principles are conflicting with each other, and some people might value one principle, the principle of life preservation, over and above the principle of autonomy, whereas other people would disagree and say, no, autonomy is more important than life preservation in this. And it's the same in terms of the aesthetic hierarchy, right? So some people might value originality of an artistic work over traditional faithfulness. Some people prefer complexity in their music or something versus simplicity, something like that. Again, I don't think that this fully solves the issue in terms of aesthetic disagreement, because again, we shouldn't be having any disagreement, not even in terms of which values take precedence over another, if God truly designed us. Again, unless you want to say God's an incompetent designer. And then there's, again, differences in aesthetic development. So yeah, some people are more developed aesthetically and stuff like that, or educated, and that does play a role in terms of the differences. Another thing here is quite obvious. With modern art, there's usually intentional ambiguity in the work itself. So the work itself is intentionally designed to cause differing opinions, right? It's either ambiguous or it's meant to be challenging, and it utilizes individual subjects' various values, knowledge, and past experiences to elicit differing responses. That's the design plan. It's not meant to have everyone agree. So that's another explanation, and I think that plays a role, definitely. Then we come to the last two, right? So this one says, number 5 says, look, maybe God designed people differently, right? To have different values and to make different judgments about at least some or maybe all aesthetic objects. That's a part of the design plan. It makes the world a more interesting place. It's more lively with, we get to disagree and live and learn from each other and appreciate different perspectives and stuff like that. Maybe it's a part of the design plan. And then finally, we have the response that Alvin Plantinga gives that's consistent with Christian theism in particular. And it says, look, aesthetic disagreements, maybe they weren't a part of the original design plan. God designed us perfectly, but then through free will, remember Adam and Eve, they fell. And through that, sin entered the world. And sin is a corruptive influence. It corrupts all of our faculties, including our faculties responsible for having aesthetic experiences and making the cognitive judgments that correspond to that. That painting's beautiful, that painting's ugly. So sin is what results in the disagreement in the world, because we're diverging from the original design plan through our own fault. We freely chose that, and God simply permitted our free will choice to have the actionable effects. So with that, that's it for this presentation. And yeah, I guess we can go to Q&A. I hope it was interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I enjoyed it, Dale. Woo. Tyler, what do you think, man? He said, I don't know.
Y'all are too smart for me, man. That's all I'm going to say about it. Like, I don't know.
Okay, so the first thing I was going to ask you, Dale, is do our disagreements about beauty tell us that there is something there? Like is there kind of like the moral argument, the fact that there's disagreements among what's right and wrong, but there's still this ontological standard that exists. Is that what you're trying to say here in certain respect?
So I would think that, the fact that there are these very passionate and firm, like, aesthetic disagreements kind of proves that that there are aesthetic correctness conditions, right? And
Right.
It kind of counts against subjectivism there, because look, we're really disagreeing and trying to say, look, it is true that the serial killer who thinks that the most grotesque things are beautiful, that's wrong. That is false. That is really false, objectively false, or objectively ugly, and he's got it wrong. So I think that aesthetic disagreements can be used to kind of really firmly establish.
Yeah, I think so too. I think you're right there. I think that was a very good point. I thought I was understanding you right there. Yeah, I think so too. I think that there is a standard, and I think you hit it right with the idea with Plantinga there at the end with sin and how it can corrupt that. And I was, one of the things was like, we don't have to be uniform, to still have like a unified idea. You know what I mean? So like, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to ask you, like, what do you think of the option? Maybe God has actually intentionally designed us to come to different opinions.
I think so.
Well, I agree. I agree with that.
Okay.
I agree.
Cool.
Yeah, well, I think that is to an extent that we're gonna have different. I think experience is also going to come into play here when you're looking at beauty, because we're gonna have, like, I haven't been north enough like you to see the Aurora Borealis. I haven't been able to see that. Come on, man, you're in Canada. You have had to see it.
It's in like the Yukon. Have you been to Alaska?
But again, I can stand and this is one of the things I was going to ask you was about the all factor. Like, where does the all factor come in? Like, we all have this notion of an allness to the world we experience. Like we look up at the moon and we're just in awe of the beauty that is reflected down on us, you know, and a wolf or a dog doesn't experience that, even though they howl at it. They don't experience it like we do. So where does that experience and awe factor come in, do you think?
Okay, so sorry, just repeat that for a second. I was just reading.
Oh, you were reading. You weren't listening to me. You were reading. You heretic.
My Keith Glover. He's someone that I can't stand. He's my brother. So sorry. Go ahead and ask your question again. Sorry.
Dirty man. Keith.
I was gonna ask you where the awe factor comes in, and I was explaining about, you know, where does experience come into this? That's pretty much what I was asking.
You brought up wolves howling at the moon, right?
Yeah, I did. That was part of it.
Can we say real quick, Dale? No, hand it over to you. Do wolves experience awe? Is that why they're howling at the moon?
No,
I don't think so. Right?
No.
Okay.
I don't.
No, what I
I
was
just didn't make the connection. I'm sorry.
No, I was
like I said, y'all are
you.
too smart for me.
Yeah, I don't
Not even
think
close. But you're a smart guy. But no, what I was asking you, Dale, was like, where does that awe factor come in? Like, you know, we got this sense of awness, you know, when we see something beautiful or we see something majestic. Like I was using the example of you in the Aurora Borealis, right? But on my note, it would be like I took my telescope out and looked at the rings of Saturn, right? And I was in awe, and I was able to show it to my kids, and it was just amazing, right? But like, where does experience and where does that awe factor come into play?
So the aesthetic experience, right? That's correlated to what the aesthetic values are. Our values are an experiential aspect, right? So basically, philosophers in aesthetics have had lots of debates, and I'll post up papers about what exactly is the nature of this aesthetic experience, right? So one person, for example, is Clive Bell, and he suggested, well, this aesthetic experience or values as we experience them, it's really an aesthetic emotion. It's a special type of emotion or something like that. Whereas most other philosophers have said, no, what it is, it's an attitude. It's a disposition towards a given object, a certain attitude towards an aesthetic object. You know, it's beautiful. That's ugly. But it's an experiential attitude, right? So yeah, there's been a lot of debates about the nature of the aesthetic.
And that's my thing is like, okay, so we have this experience. All of us have this experience. I mean, every single human being has to have this experience at some point.
I don't.
You know, get out of here. I've seen it. I've seen it in you when you look at your daughter. So I don't want to hear it. So,
she's ugly. I'm just kidding. I love my daughter.
I'm gonna record. Well, this is being
We're
recorded.
being recorded.
I'm gonna show her this when
I
she's
don't
older.
Dad's
no,
drunk.
so
no, I'm
like,
just kidding.
but that's kind of, you know, just like we said, these guys, they have disagreements and there's debates upon this, but the very fact that we have them says something, and we've already kind of established that. And I think we're talking about you know, could the uniformity and unity type stuff that has to do, to me, with the rate or at the time we experience it. And that's maybe where these disagreements come from.
The uniformity of the experience?
Well, like, we don't have to have a uniformity of experience. We all have different experiences at different times.
Okay.
Right? So I think that's where we could have disagreement, but I don't think I've met anybody that thinks a spider is beautiful. It's crawling in your house.
Well, that kind of relates.
My wife.
So that kind of relates to Keith's question here, right? So he's kind of saying, well, if God designed us to be to have different opinions, well, doesn't that reduce down to just subjectivism? Beauty's in the eye of the beholder. And I would say so, not necessarily, right? Because there are still aesthetic correctness conditions. So it could be there are certain boundaries, maybe only certain types of differing values and judgments are permitted, and God is designed within that range. But again, remember that serial killer, he's outside that acceptable range. Again, assuming that God has designed us differently. So he would not be acceptable. His values and his judgments would still be wrong. And
Right.
those are that's where we would appeal to a combination and say, well, sin accounts for why he came to that judgment or something like that.
Yeah, I
But
would see
let me
that-
ask.
that-
Let
yeah.
me jump in
Go
real
ahead.
quick. So rewind it a step back. We were talking about serial killers, right? And how they find just gruesome, like things that normal people would find absolutely hideous. They find it beautiful in the sense. So in their case, Dell, wouldn't beauty be subjective in the sense of beauty is in the eye of the beholder? At that point, maybe if there even is an objective standard, right, that you guys are talking about, in that case, in the serial killer's case, would subjective beauty be true at that point?
Well, it would certainly be true that the serial killer is having an aesthetic experience, right? And he's making an aesthetic judgment. But the question here, in terms of the argument, is we're trying to assess, well, what is the grounding for these aesthetic values and judgments, and in terms of aesthetic correctness conditions. So yes, he's having this experience, but I think most normal people would want to say, yeah, but it's not. There's no truth to that. That's a false judgment. So that's why under theistic dispositional realism, who is that ultimate judge? Well,
God.
what God would judge to be beautiful or what God would judge to be ugly, we need to be consistent with him. Maybe people have different opinions, and they're consistent with stuff that God could do, but that serial killer is inconsistent with God's values and judgment.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
and that's what I find so compelling about this is that, yes, we can have we have these disagreements, but those disagreements establish that there is a such thing as aesthetic value. There is a such thing as these aesthetics, and you can see that in what brings us to what I call brings us to the table, right? We have certain things that will bring us to the table, and although we may have a disagreement on what we like and what so forth, there are certain aesthetics like a sunset or a sunrise
Or
that will
duct tape.
bring us or that will bring us to the table and say, wow, let me have a painting of this in my home, or let me have you sit here and look at the Mona Lisa, which I find really interesting because I just saw a video of the winery where Leonardo did that, which is really cool. She, her parents were vintners, so it was pretty cool. But yeah, like I think that's very fascinating, that this establishes an objective aesthetic, not just a singular aesthetic, but an ontological idea of an aesthetic value that I think we can't ignore, even though we may disagree on it. And I think you're right. I think sin plays a factor into just as much as it corrupts our morality, it corrupts our idea of beauty.
I got a question.
Sure.
Dale, do you think that we will all, once we are in the new heavens and the new earth, so I believe that we won't be in heaven forever after we die, but the Lord will completely redesign earth, and that his saints will be on earth. Do you think that we'll all be on the same page at that point with what's beautiful? Given, I think, with the destruction of sin and evil at that point, maybe everything at that point will be beautiful, right? What are your thoughts about that?
So yeah, I think it would come down to that question: has God perhaps designed certain flexibility and variation within a certain range, right? So certainly aesthetic values and judgments that are outside of that, due to sin, those are going to end. Those will not be there.
Right.
But for example, okay, so certain people have the aesthetic value of, taste is an aesthetic value. So some people like broccoli, some people prefer chocolate ice cream or something.
I like both. Like, who don't like broccoli chocolate ice cream? Okay.
Gotcha. Yeah, well, I think that we can all
It's
agree.
like milk in a bag.
You bugger.
I love you.
But yeah, so it's both are aesthetically good. Broccoli, God would like, if he was Jesus probably would have liked broccoli.
Jesus ate broccoli, bro. I'm telling you right now.
Well, he might in heaven, right? And he might like chocolate ice cream. So some people like both. I'm not sure though if I want to say like, oh well, does that mean every human being in the new heavens and the new earth has to like both to be like
They
God, or
better.
they better? I
Brussels
think
sprouts too.
yeah. Well, the point is, I think it's possible to answer your question that maybe
All
some
right.
people will never like broccoli or something.
So Keith asked a really good question. So he said, in layman's terms, so I can understand, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, with God as the ultimate judge. Because that kind of sounds like exactly what you're saying. Is that in one sense, yes, it's subjective to the beholder, what we call beautiful, but the things that we might necessarily call beautiful might not line up.
Oops, he froze.
Yeah, he froze. So what do you think about that question itself, Dale?
Yeah, so I think it's a good way to do it, right? Good way
We
to
got to
say
take it.
right?
We need. Hey, Dale, we need a snapshot of
With
that
God's
frozen
idea of
picture.
beauty.
He's still he's gone.
He's going.
Yeah,
It's all good.
holy beholder. Again, I wouldn't use that term because it can be confusing, but I get what he's saying. Like, yeah, so
Yeah,
the person,
absolutely.
the beholder who has values and judgments in line and consistent with values and judgments of God as the ultimate judge, they're good. Anyone who has values or judgments inconsistent with those that God would or could make would be outside of that. Yeah.
Awesome.
So is beauty arbitrary at that point?
No.
Well, no, because it's kind of like
It's kind of like the Euthyphro, right? If I give you the horns of that argument,
One's idea of beauty is arbitrary, even if it's affected and tainted by sin. Correct?
One's idea of beauty.
One's idea of beauty is the thing that's arbitrary. If it doesn't line up with God, then therefore it's wrong, therefore it's not beautiful. So at that point, somebody's idea of beauty could be arbitrary, right? It stems from within themselves only.
Mm.
But if it doesn't line up with God, it's not beautiful. They're wrong. They're a heretic, as in David Russell's words, and they need to repent. Right?
Yeah, right.
Yes!
So it's
I'm following.
Exactly. So yeah, they would be incorrect, right? Like, so God is the ultimate grounding. It's exactly similar and parallel to the moral argument almost, where
Sweet.
God is.
That's what I was trying to get to. It's just like the moral argument, but you parallel it with beauty.
Exactly. So God's essential aesthetic nature
is beautiful,
would be the ultimate grounding for these values and for his judgments that he makes
and because we're body and soul, and we're real beings, and we are subjects there, like you said, what did I write down here? Like the objects and the observers are necessary to receive those things, and they can be corrupted. Yeah. And I think that makes a lot of sense, because I think that just like the rights we have that are fundamental to us, there are some things that are fundamentally beautiful. We love a beautiful plate of food, and it brings us all to a table. Some of us don't like certain foods. Some of us don't like the foods that are good to it for us.
Mm-hmm.
However, every one of us experiences a beautiful plate of food that brings us to the table, and we can say, this is actually beautiful. We can look at the opposite sex, like you said, attraction is a big thing. That's a real thing. But let's get into this emotivism.
Okay,
go ahead.
Before, I just want to raise one thing that's interesting, and it relates to what Tyler was asking, right? So because he was talking about, look, the subject is needed. Ultimately, you need a person to have these values. That's an experience, and a mind to make a cognitive judgment about something. But it's still true. Like, it's not saying that, okay, so it's ultimately into the subject that's grounding these values and thing. No, we still want to say that the object itself has a property of being beautiful or something like that, because we say, look, that object is beautiful in itself, right? So this is why I think that the notion of dispositional properties is important, right? So it's a causal conception of aesthetic value. So this object has certain properties, and those properties dispose a aesthetic subject to respond and to have that experience and to make that judgment. So that's where the object is still needed. Those properties are relevant.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's kind of what I was getting to with that question was. Yeah, I agree totally, 100%. You were talking. I had something I wanted to bring to that table, but okay, yeah, this whole idea of degrees.
Okay.
Can you go over that real quick about degrees? You said you didn't think that was a good argument to establish certain things, but there obviously is degrees when it comes to the varying subjects plus environment, right?
I think it's. I was saying I don't think it's a good whole explanation, but it is.
Yeah, absolutely. It's
definitely,
part of it, but it's not the whole.
Yeah.
Is that what you meant? Okay. Yeah, I was just a little. I think I was writing something down when you were going over it, but yeah. So it is part of it, just like the subject's the part of it. So there is a degree aspect here, but yeah, I think I think I get what you're saying there, and I know you're going to go over the a little more of the emotivism, the
Gotcha.
that whole idea. I would love to hear that because, like I said, I'm comparing this to a class I took in seminary not too long ago, probably about a little over a year ago.
Yeah.
And I just love to compare both of them together. So if you could go over that whole idea of that emotivism, because it's also in the moral argument as well,
Yeah, exactly. So, all right. So let me share my screen again. So now we can go into the stuff that I missed in the presentation. Son of a gun. Okay, so here's let me just make it full screen. So here's kind of I didn't make this. I'm not that, but I took a grad seminar in the philosophy of aesthetics with Glenn Parsons, so he deserves the credit for this. But you can kind of see, look, there's this fundamental question, right? Are we making assertions? This is another way of saying, are there aesthetic correctness conditions? And all the theories that I kind of covered in my opening presentation, they will answer yes to that, right? Subjectivism, for example, will say, yes, there are truths, but they're relative. Whereas the other positions will say yes, and they're grounded in something else, kind of thing. Now, emotivism is the only position that's different. And it answers no, there are no aesthetic correctness conditions at all. So what is this? I kind of briefly mentioned it's a position made by A.J. Ayer called aesthetic emotivism. And believe it or not, I'll link to his paper on my blog on realseekerministries.wordpress.com in the next couple days, so you can read it for yourself. But his paper is really talking about ethical emotivism. 99% of his paper is about that. And he basically says, well, look, moral values, what are they? They're just emotions, and our moral judgments are expressions of those emotions. And then he has a little paragraph where he says, oh, by the way, and as for aesthetic values, same thing. They're just emotions and the expressions of our emotions. So that's what aesthetic emotivism is here. And it's truly related to the moral values and stuff like that. But so A.J. Ayer, he kind of says, he compares it to emotional ejaculations. He was around back in the 1920s and stuff like that. But you can see, look, my assessment, this thing sucks. By denying aesthetic correctness conditions, they're just denying a fundamental feature of our world. And this has been the criticisms by people like Peter Kivy, who's written papers. Again, that'll be in my blog for you guys. And he's just devastated Ayer's notion on this. Not to mention the fact that Ayer's notion of these aesthetic correctness conditions and answering, no, there are no aesthetic truths or correctness conditions at all. It's founded upon this position that was popular back in the early 20th century called logical positivism. And these guys were nutballs. First of all, it's self-refuting. No philosopher in the world, they laugh at you if you go for this. But this was a fad for decades in the up to the mid part of the 20th century, I'd say 1960s, maybe it was done with people like Flew and stuff. But anyways, they would just say, look, statements, when you make a statement, unless it can be empirically proven through the scientific method, those statements are not just false, they're utterly meaningless. They have no meaning. You're not stating something as, you're not saying, I think the Mona Lisa is beautiful, and that's true. It truly is beautiful. No, you're gibbering, you're jabbering. You're not saying anything that has a meaning. And as I said, logical positivism is totally implausible. It's self-refuting. There's not a philosopher alive today, atheist, skeptic, Christian, whatever. No one would go for this. So this is a really deep flaw for it. I think that's the major Achilles heel for this. Obviously with him, he does link aesthetic and moral values, right? He says they're all just emotions and stuff like that. Another thing here is, well, why on earth would we disagree? If we're just expressing our emotions, why would I disagree with you about that? There's no reason to disagree. You're just, you're happy when you see Picasso and he makes me sad or something like that. And obviously the object is totally irrelevant to that. The same deal with subjectivism. One last interesting thing here is that G.E. Moore kind of critiqued this, and he raised the open question argument, right? Which is kind of, it applies to various things. Objectivism, whenever you try to reduce aesthetic values or moral values to a non-aesthetic property or something like that, or a non-moral property. So this would apply to evolution, right? Aesthetic values reduced down to properties that help you survive. In this case, aesthetic emotivism says aesthetic values reduced down to certain emotions or something like that. There's always this open question. Yeah, but is it true that what is beautiful reduces down to me being happy? And because you can just ask that question as an open question, that proves that they're not identical in and of themselves. And this is called G. Moore's open question argument, and it totally refutes emotivism, but it also applies to, reductionist views of objectivism, I would say, as well. People that said that beautiful reduces down to the property of proportionality. Well, you have this open question. Is it true that what is beautiful reduces to what is proportional? So yeah, that's kind of my take on the aesthetic emotivism there.
Right on, Dale. I appreciate it, buddy. David's doing something. I don't know what he's doing, but it is what it is.
That was his question.
I know, right? Anyway.
I hope it was. Did that make sense to you, Tyler? Or?
Dude, I'm gonna be perfectly honest with you, Dale. I've never heard of any of this stuff before, right? And so it's extremely hard for me to follow, knowing, like, given the detail that you guys are going into it, it's really hard for me to follow. Okay. Because nothing on your guys' part, but because I haven't studied it myself. And so it sounds like what you guys are having, I would compare it to somebody that's never had Greek class setting in on a second year Greek lecture, right? Okay. And so that's just kind of where I'm coming from. Nothing against you guys, it's my fault.
My apologies, because this is kind of why my brother's actually listening in today. So
that's good.
I struggle with that. So I actually wanted to make a popular level presentation understandable. It sounds like sure. I kind of failed, but
no. Just because I can't follow, it doesn't mean our listeners aren't. And we've got a bunch of people even in the comments. So check out what Michelle said. Dang, it's been 50 minutes already. So people are grasping this, and maybe it just takes me a second time to go back and listen through it for me to actually be like, oh, okay, I get what he's talking about now. And so my apologies.
No worries. I'm the same way. So yeah, cool. And like I said, for people interested, I'm going to be posting a bunch of papers on all these positions. So, you can go and look at the philosophers who might explain it better than I can and stuff like that.
Sure. Hey, Dale, Jamie Russell has asked, breathing poorly changes the way you look, diet changes the way your looks, or changes your looks, etc. Is that fixed in the eternal state?
I definitely do not think so.
And then what is not beautiful, or what is not beautiful when dealing with those sorts of things?
Feel free to answer that first question first, Dale.
Yeah, so that was a two-parter. I just wanted to give you both.
Yeah, so I believe personally, again, I don't have any scriptural warrant, but again, I think that God, again, it's all about trying to be the way God designed us to be, or has designed us to be in the end state at the very least. And I don't think being overweight is kind of especially where you have trouble breathing and stuff, that is not an optimal design. So I can't picture people, at least saved people, being in a state where they're so fat they can't breathe. Yeah, so I would say no. I don't think that there's going to be that in the end in heaven or on the new earth.
That would entail suffering, right? In some degree or another. And we know, according to Revelation, no suffering. God's going to wipe away every tear from our eye. There will be no more death, and suffering is a result of
And that's
sin
beautiful.
and death, right? And there will be no interruptions in heaven. Thank God. That'd be nice. Anyway.
I just
Go
said
ahead,
it was
David.
beautiful.
Go ahead, David.
I was complimenting you. It was
Go ahead.
beautiful. I'm having a battle with your brother right now, and told him that you're no longer his brother, you're mine now, and that I'm taking you, and he can have the bag of milk.
I thought you were saying the reverse, because my brother infuriates me when sometimes he'll watch the Theo Geeks thing, and he's always like, "Oh, David Russell's so much better than you. Like, I can understand what Russell's saying. I can't understand what you're saying." So, yeah, I think he's a fan of yours, Russell.
No, but no, Dale. I mean, I love it, man. I think beauty is fundamental to the human experience, and there has to be something objective there. And I think you presented that tonight, and I really think that is part and parcel to this argument, is that there is beauty. And one of the things that really turned me on to this argument was John Lennox, right? He was talking about, looking up at the moon, and the dog, the wolves will howl at it and this and that, and you're looking at the moon, but the moon's not looking back at you, even though you're sitting there in this experience. You're sitting there in this experience that only you can have, and it's because you reflect the image of God.
No, so John, I didn't know John Lennox spoke about the argument from beauty. So
he didn't. It wasn't. It was he was presenting a whole nother sermon, but he was talking about like how the human in the human experience, we kind of look up at the moon, and we could just be like, wow, this thing's beautiful. This moonlight, the way it's reflecting off of the water or whatever, and he's just like, the moon, it's not looking back at you saying, "Oh, look at that human." It's just funny to me, and how we look at a sunset, and like these things are across time. They're across.
So Lennox isn't saying that the wolves, because I don't think
no. He's not talking about. No, he's even saying the wolves are howling at it, but they're not looking at it the same way as we are, because we're made in the image of God.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the only worldview that can explain that.
Animals, just like saying, animals aren't moral agents. I don't think that they're aesthetic agents either. I don't think
they're not. And that was the whole point, was like, how are we these only creatures experiencing this? And he related it to the image of God, which I thought was really wild, Yeah. But another thing is as people, we're pretty diverse, and there's one preacher, I'm not going to name his name, but there's one evangelist that said, when you look at a telescope, you're looking at a contraption, you're looking at metal parts, you're looking at lenses, and you're looking through lenses, but when you look through that telescope, you see the heavens. And there's that awness, and that beauty will come in, and it's natural to all of us. So if it's natural to all of us, there's got to be something behind it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think
thought it was funny. I thought it was funny the other day. I was reading an article speaking about telescopes and looking at the heavens, how with the invention of the James Webb telescope, comparing that with some Hubble images, it was like with the Hubble, they were looking at optical illusions, given the James Webb that is now like kind of broken those barriers. And so it can see things that the Hubble can't. I just thought it was really interesting looking through a man-made, object at the heavens, that the other one, the Hubble, actually put some kind of optical illusion. I'll link it in the description if I can find the article, but I just thought that was interesting.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah.
So
Yeah. So it's all right. Well, what you guys are kind of mentioning, you think I've established that there's aesthetic values and stuff are objective in nature. What do you guys make of the distinction then between dispositional realism, or my version, theistic dispositional realism, which is kind of a combination? It also incorporates the need for this aesthetic subject as well. Or are you guys more like what Sean McDowell was presenting was more the straightforward objectivist thing, that their beauty is in the properties of the object? And for me, I kind of, one argument that my prof mentioned that I think is good is the empty museum thought experiment, right? You have the most beautiful sculptures or artworks or whatever music playing in a empty museum, no one there to behold these things, right? I don't think it makes sense to say that, yeah, these objects are beautiful, kind of thing, right? Like
I do, and I'll tell you why. Is because I think they flow from the nature of God, and I think God is beautiful. So if I'm going off of that, yes, I think that there's something inherent in certain properties. Okay, so I do think that, like, a spider is ugly and a snake is nasty, right? I'm gonna freak out when I see a colored snake, because it to me that tells me that it's probably poisonous, right? And I think these things can be gained through experience and stuff like that. Okay, yes, but I do think there is some inherent value in this, because when I take it back to God, right, I think that in his nature, he made it that way. So let me go back to your museum analogy. So even if the museum is empty and there's no subjects to experience it, the music that is still being played is beautiful, right? Even if there's no subject to receive it, just like I think logic exists, even if there's no subject to experience it. However, I do think there is something to say about, okay, there are subjects, so we have to find a way where that fits.
but why is it beautiful?
Well, wait,
Because it's part of God's nature, and God is beautiful.
but
So it would be beautiful regardless if we existed.
all right, so Russell, what you're saying though, I want to clarify this here, because I potentially disagree. You do need a subject, but you're saying God is a subject, right? So he's observing this or something. Then that's dispositional realism. You still have, or are you saying no? Even if there's no subjects, not even God, nothing, then.
Well, I don't think I can't understand what that means without God, right? So I there has to be some pure actuality, right? So there has to be something. But his nature's beautiful. It's who he is. It's his fundamental parts. You know, I mean, it's his nature. I can't explain it any other way. I don't think.
Yeah,
But his
certainly.
nature's beautiful, and if you're going to consider that as part of it, then yeah, like I said, I agree with you. But like, as far as like independent subjects, I don't think you need them because of God. I think God's beautiful in himself. You know, I think it's part of his nature to be beautiful. You know, he couldn't be any other way, you know, just like he's perfect. He can't be, you know, he has to be maximally great. Otherwise he's not God, you know, it's just,
well, I would fully agree with that. Right.
Yeah.
He has certain properties, omnipotence, omniscience, and all these properties.
Yeah.
They're dispositional properties, in that they would dispose a subject, in this case, God, pretend creation doesn't exist. So God, and then he would respond. He has that aesthetic value. He values himself as beautiful and makes that judgment. I am beautiful, or, you know,
because
God.
he is beautiful.
Yeah, but
okay.
There's a slight difference there, but cool.
It's a slight. I get you, but I don't know how to quite define it right now. I heard you. I agree, but
if is something beautiful, like that empty museum, a Picasso or a Renaissance painting or something. I'm not a fan of modern art, so let's go with the Renaissance painting. For the sake of argument, this is logically impossible, but for the sake of argument, pretend God is not having an aesthetic experience when looking at that piece of art. Is that piece of art still beautiful without God experiencing or valuing that?
I don't know how to answer that, Dale. I really don't, because I don't see the art being able to be there if there wasn't God in the first place.
true. Yeah, like everything exists through God and stuff. But
Yeah.
So
So I
just to
mean,
entertain your argument,
because
Dale,
he's
I would say
actuality,
no.
right? He's
That's
pure
an issue.
actuality. God is pure actuality, right, Dale? So like God is, to me, he's the maximally great being. He's pure actuality, so.
But again, that's kind of missing the point of the question.
I know.
So the dispositional realist would say, no, God has to be there to value that thing for it to be
Okay.
beautiful, but you can't extract the subject from that equation. It's that painting without God having an experience is not beautiful. Whereas the pure objectivist would say, no, regardless of any subject having experience, whether God, human, angel, whatever, or demon, that thing has the property of being beautiful by itself. So that's sort of the difference. That's what I was trying to get at.
That's interesting. I'd have to think more about that one.
Cool. All right, cool. Yeah, I don't know. I didn't cover aesthetic Platonism. I don't know. Do you want me to cover that or?
Yeah. Just go over that real quick.
All right. All right. So very, very quickly. So we have the last position is what's called atheistic aesthetic Platonism. And this is exactly, you've heard William Lane Craig talk about moral Platonism, right? So basically, Platonism is the view that there's this heavenly realm outside of space and time or whatever, and there are these abstract objects that he called forms. So justice is just floating around out there. The number one is floating around in this Platonic heaven. The form of beauty is floating around, or the form of ugliness. And objects in the world are just pale copies of these forms. They're imperfect, and an object in this world can be said to be beautiful only insofar as it participates in the form of beauty in this heavenly realm. Or an object can be morally good or just. I can be just insofar as I participate in the form of justice. So this is what Platonism is in terms of aesthetic Platonism, right? It's saying certain abstract objects are beautiful insofar as they have the property of participating in the form of beauty in this realm. And obviously, it's the same criticisms mostly that William Lane Craig raises against moral Platonism that apply here. Again, it's not thinking about the need for this aesthetic subject that I was talking about. And also another role here is, why on earth are human beings trying to be, or think they have to be aligned? In order to be correct, you have to be aligned to certain aesthetic values like beauty, but not aligned to ugly, things that are ugly or something like that, the form of ugliness, right? Why would that be the case? There wouldn't be any aesthetic correctness conditions here. And certainly there wouldn't be. Why are there correlations between aesthetic and moral values? Because abstract objects like these forms don't stand in causal relations. Why on earth are human beings aligned to certain values and not others? That's a major thing, let alone the fact that it's totally implausible to think, what does it mean for beautiful to just exist as an abstract object? What does it mean for justice to exist? The forms don't make any sense. They're implausible. So that's the criticism there.
Huh. No, that's fascinating. I hear that. I mean, I also think, does that relate? I mean, could it be different? And that's just what I'm thinking right now. And I'd have to come up with like something along those lines. That's a very interesting, and that adds a little bit more dynamic to the argument too, I think. Yeah. So, yeah, I think it's good. I think you got something going here. Yeah, keep developing it, man. Think about some of those things, but yeah, I like it overall. I think you did a good job.
Awesome. Thank you. And yeah, again, thanks for letting me present it on the show and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
I was trying to make it understandable. I probably didn't do a good job, but still, I'm going to post up the sources, and I'll post up my slides. So hopefully it'll make more sense if you go back. But
no, I think you did a good job. I mean, I got it. I think I got it, most of it. There might be some things, but that's going to be the nature of presenting an argument that people don't listen to as much anymore. That we don't cover. We we don't take the twists and the turns. We don't run through the maze of objections and possible unknowables, so that's part of it. So, but I really like the beard too. There's a little dirt on your face, so I think that's
it's Movember. We call it
yeah,
Movember in Canada.
Movember. Yeah, well, it's not. It's no shave November. So, get it right. I thought you guys were hockey guys. That's what all the hockey guys call it. No, but yeah, no. Anyways, man, I know it's definitely a great argument, and I would love to see it even develop more, which, it kind of like prompts me and kicks me in the butt to make me look into it even deeper than I have already. It's been like I said, it's been over a year since I really gave this one that much thought, but I always thought, hey, look, we need to redevelop some of these older arguments, these older philosophical arguments that we just kind of abandoned. And I think you did that tonight. I think you revived even more so, from my understanding, what we did here. And the whole idea, okay, do we have to have a subject? I think, well, if God is a subject and he's actuality, then and we'd have to. He's going to make a judgment on it. It's part of his nature too. He's a judge, right? So he's going to make a judgment on the beauty of it. Yeah, it's the very nature of God is beautiful, but also it's because he is who he is that it is beautiful.
Exactly.
And it's because who he is in every single aspect of his being is why it's beautiful. So it's is why it is what it is. So I mean, it's hard. I don't think. I guess it wasn't right for us to kind of say, okay, well, if God wasn't a subject or it's only this. I think it's everything that God is what would cause that to be beautiful. The entirety of his nature, because it's intrinsic to who he is. He's intrinsically the subject. You know what I mean? He's intrinsically beautiful. It's part of his nature. It's part of every fabric of who he is. So. I think it would apply dispositionally just as well as it would when objectively, like like Sean McDowell was saying. I think it would apply both, because maybe one of us weren't looking at it from that specific vantage point of the entirety of God. We were looking at it. We're kind of like becoming monolithic in a way, kind of going to our own natures.
So that's sort of the whole point, right? Like the empty museum, all those things are beautiful because there's always a subject present, namely God, right? And that's sort of the key insight here. Is
so that's the thing, is the museum really empty then?
So it's not, right? But again, I was trying my best to give.
I know all analogies break down, right, bro?
For sure. Yeah. But yeah, so that's sort of the fun with dispositional realism. Again, that person who has that experience that grounds it, it's human beings, art experts or aesthetic experts. Whereas my key insight with theistic dispositional realism, we don't want to defer to these people. So it's actually God that's the true aesthetic judge. That's the uniqueness of my position and my argument, I think.
Right on. Well, man, that's good stuff, Dale. Let's. Where can we hear more about your argument here? Do you have anything else on it besides what you did tonight? Do you have more? Are you going to post this argument on your WordPress and stuff like that? If where people can find you, let us know.
Yeah, so I'll probably within the next tomorrow or something like that on Saturday, I'll post up my version of this show, and on my blog on realseekerministries.wordpress.com, I will post my blog where I post sources, scholarly sources on all of the various topics that I address, the various positions, stuff like that, as well as counter papers or papers that are critical of those hypotheses and stuff like that. So yeah, you can check out that. I'll also have links to previous shows that I did where I went into a little bit more detail. Like I did a 2-hour solo show or something like that, where I just gave a lecture. And I also did a debate on SNS with David Johnson on this argument about a year and a half ago or a couple of years ago or something. So I'll post those links for people.
Right on, man. That's so cool. So you guys know Dale. You can find him at Real Seekers. You can find him on WordPress, but guess what? He's the man. And you know what? He drinks bags of milk. So
You know what? I'm happy my brother didn't fall asleep this time. So
no, it's good.
that's
That's
a
good.
win for
And it was good to meet your brother, Keith. It was an honor, sir. Your brother's a good man, and we love him here on Faith Unaltered, and we love him in America. So he's pretty popular here. So
awesome. Right.
But anyways, guys, me and Tyler, we got a lot of other stuff. If you notice, we kind of had our thing here with the little turkey in the back instead of our lion, and that's because you know what, next week is Thanksgiving, guys. So we want you guys to have a wonderful Thanksgiving. Dale doesn't celebrate Thanksgiving because he's a heretic, but it's okay. We do, because we're Americans.
I don't celebrate it in the winter when it's covered by snow. I mean, it's supposed to be a fall holiday, right?
Right, but you know what? We just wanted to wish you guys a happy Thanksgiving. I usually put something funny together for Thanksgiving, and we might still do that. But again, Tyler, he usually does some more announcements about what's coming on in the weeks to follow and stuff like that. But all I got to tell you tonight is stay tuned. You're going to want to see what's coming up. Like he said, there's Tim Stratton's going to be coming back on and answering questions. We've got plenty more planned. We had a debate. We had it scheduled and then it got pushed back. So I'm not quite sure. But if we don't have something laid out in stone, and I think we do, but I'm not going to speak for Tyler because I know he's got some stuff in the works as well. But I know for me is I'm still going to do an open mic with you guys here soon, and I want as many of you guys to come on and chill with us as possible. And it doesn't matter what you want to talk about. We'll start with usually a topic, but we veer off drastically. You can ask Dale. We go off on all sorts of subjects. We do open mics, but we do it because we love to interact with our fans. We love to interact with our audiences. And, we just love having you guys actually come in here and actually say, hey, look, this is what I want to talk about, and build relationships with you. And that's what it's Christianity is about, is relationships. So, and about Jesus, of course, he's the number one, and, he teaches us about relationships. But other than that, guys, it's been a great night. Again, thank you, Dale, for coming on.
No, thank you for having me.
And everybody, as Tyler would say, which he's not going to say because he's not here right now, God bless, good night, and stay like Christ.